Shalom, everybody.
Shalom.
Um, Today we'll be going into the law. Specifically, is the law something that we should keep, or is the law something that should be done away with, or and what is it that Christ says about the law? So we're going to take this topic and dive into it scripture by scripture, precept upon precept, to build a case for the law. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, in 1 John chapter 2. 1 John chapter 2, verse 3.
1 John chapter 2, verse 3. And hereby we do know that we know him if we keep his commandments.
We do know that we know him if we keep his commandment. So the way that you know the Most High, or that you know Christ, is by keeping his commandment. Continue, verse 4.
Verse 4. He that says, I know him, and keeping not his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not in him.
So anyone that claims to know him but decides that I'm not keeping his commandment for whatever reason, whether it's because you think we're not supposed to, or rather it's because you just don't want to. For you to say that you know the Most High and you're not keeping his commandments makes you a liar, and the truth is not in you. Continue.
Verse 5. But whoso keepeth his word, in him verily is the love of the Most High perfect.
So who does keep his word, the person that keeps his commandments, then the love of the Most High is perfected in him. With that being said, let's get a precept on that. Let's go to stay in the chapter in the book of 1 John, jump to the 5th chapter, and get the 3rd verse in the 5th chapter, and let's look at that love that's perfected in those who keep the word or keep the commandment of the Most High and of Christ.
1 John chapter 5, verse 3. For this is the love of the Most High.
So here it is. We about to find out what the love of the Most High is. We just came from verse 5. It says, whosoever keepeth his word, in him verily is the love of the Most High perfected. What is the love of the Most High? We're about to find out. Read it again.
For this is the love of the Most High, that we keep his commandments.
That we keep his commandments. So those who keep his word, in him is the love perfected. So those who keep the word of the Most High, his love is perfected in them. What is that love? It says that love of the Most High is that we keep his commandments. Continue.
And his commandments are not grievous.
His commandments are not grievous. And there's many times I've had discussions with people, and they want to say, man, it's over 600 some laws. That's to say that his laws are grievous. Right here is saying his laws are not grievous. And usually my response to that is, well, you living in America, you keeping more than 600 some laws. You keeping laws that America has put in place every day. You're keeping laws that you don't even know that you're keeping. So how can you debate or have an argument with keeping the Most High's laws and claim that they're grievous or hard to be kept, when here it is, you're keeping man's laws every day without giving without saying that they're hard, or without giving them a issue with it? All right, continue reading. Let's go back to 1 John chapter 3, John 2, and continue reading at verse 6.
Verse 6. He that says he abideth in him ought himself also to walk, even as he walked.
Okay, so it says, after saying all that by, explaining the love of the Most High, and explaining how you know him, and explaining that you don't know him unless you keep the commandments, he then says, he that said he abideth in the Most High, he that said he abideth in him, ought himself also to walk as even he walked. So who is he talking? Who is this he we're talking about? Well, let's look at verse 1 in the same chapter. We started at verse 3. Let's look at verse 1 in the same chapter.
St. John chapter 2, verse 1. My little children, these things written I unto you, that ye sin not. And if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Yeshua Christ, the righteous.
Okay, so this advocate that we have is Yeshua Christ. And so as you continue reading from verse 1 on down to the verses that we've read, it's continuing to talk about Christ. So, to answer that question of who it is that we should be walking like, it's Christ. You know, it says, he that saith he abideth in him ought himself also to walk, even as he walked. So we should walk even as Christ walked. How did Christ walk? He followed the commandments and taught others to follow the commandments as well. So, with that in mind, let's look at how Christ walked. Let's go to Matthew 5, chapter 5, verse 17.
Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets.
Okay, read that one more time.
Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. Think not that I am come to destroy the law.
That I am come to destroy the law.
Or the prophets.
Or the prophets. So Christ, right off the bat, he's saying, don't think that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. That's easy to see. So Christ says here, do not even let it enter or cross your mind to think I came to destroy the law of the prophets. And when you're speaking of the prophets, it's speaking of the prophets' prophecies. Because that's what the prophets did. They prophesied. And when it's speaking of the law, we all know it's speaking of what Moses came down from the mount with. So he says, I come to fulfill them. Continue reading that scripture.
Verse 7, Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. Think not that I have come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill.
But to fulfill. I come to fulfill them. This includes all the prophecies spoken concerning Christ. And with that in mind, let's look at a prophecy that was spoken by a prophet. Let's go to Isaiah 66. Hold Matthew's, because we're going to come back. So we're going here in light of the fact that Christ said that he came to fulfill the law and the prophets. So in fulfilling the law and the prophets, that means he's fulfilling the prophecies of the prophet. So let's look at this prophecy spoken of in Isaiah chapter 66, verse 15.
Isaiah chapter 66, verse 15. For behold, the Most High will come with fire and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire.
Okay, so here we see that this is speaking of Christ, Yeshua. It's saying he's going to come with fire and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury and his rebuke with flames of fire. So before we go any further into Isaiah, we already know that this has not happened yet. This is something that's a prophecy even still. This was a prophecy in Isaiah's time, and it's a prophecy still in our time. It is yet to happen. Okay, continue reading.
Verse 16. For by fire and by his sword will the Most High plead with all flesh, and the slain of the Most High shall be many.
So here it is. It's saying how Yeshua will come back with fire and his sword. And when it says plead, it's not the plead that we know of as begging somebody. This plead means judging. He's coming to judge. He's judging with fire and with the sword, and he's going to do this with all flesh. So continue reading.
Verse 17. They that sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens behind one tree in the midst, eating swine's flesh, and the abomination of the mouse shall be consumed together, saith the Most High.
Okay, so we go from verse 15 of Yeshua coming back with fire and fury to verse 16, where he's going to plead with man with fire and his sword, to verse 17 of saying how he will catch those who are in the garden behind a tree, eating swine's flesh and the abomination and the mouse, and it says they shall be consumed. Okay, now let's look at this. We're in Isaiah. This is the Old Testament. It's a prophet of the Old Testament that is speaking. He's prophesying of Yeshua Christ's return. Something that has not happened. It didn't happen then, and it hasn't happened yet, but it will happen. Okay, so now let's look at the present. We're reading this, something that happened in the past, but in the present, we're under the new covenant or in the New Testament. But we're reading of something of that a prophet spoke of that is yet to happen. Now, this prophecy that is yet to happen, even though we're in the New Testament and the New Covenant, is speaking of Christ judging people for eating swine's flesh. Now, that is a law that was given under the Old Testament, in the Old Testament. So Christ is going to be judging according to the law when he comes back. All right? So we're looking at this because he says that he came to fulfill the law and the prophets. That's what he's going to do. He's going to fulfill the law when he comes back. He's going to judge according to the law. He's going to fulfill the prophets. Isaiah is a prophet prophesying of his return and judging those that he see behind a tree eating swine's flesh. That's the law of clean and unclean meats. He's going to judge according to that, as well as all the other laws. All right, now that we've seen this prophecy has not yet been fulfilled, let's see what else Christ has to say back in Matthew. Let's go back to Matthew 5. And let's start at verse 18.
Matthew chapter 5, verse 18. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled.
All right, so Christ is still talking about the law. And he said, till heaven and earth pass. We living in the earth right now. It has not passed, right? So one jot or one tittle has not been changed of the law. You know, it's very plain to understand when Christ speaks, he speaks plainly. You know, there's no misconceptions. You can't go somewhere else in the Bible and say, well, right here, Christ is saying not to keep the law. Nah. It's very obvious that Christ is making and building a point on the law. He said it won't change. He said it hasn't changed. He said he came to fulfill it, not to destroy it. All right, let's go to verse 19.
Verse 19. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven.
The least in the kingdom of heaven. So breaking and teaching others to break even the least of the commandments will cause you to be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But those who do and teach who do and teach the commandments will be called great in the kingdom. And we'll see that as we continue reading the scripture. Finish verse 19, please.
But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
You see that? So it's pretty cut and dry. This is Christ speaking. And he's saying, if you teach people not to keep the law and don't do them yourself, you'll be considered the least in the kingdom. But those who do the law and teach others to do the law will be considered great in the kingdom. So we see not only how Christ walked, but what he also taught as well. So if we're to walk as he walked, like it said in 1 John, and this is how he walked. He kept the law. That's pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump to 1 John. Let's jump back